Alejandro Bevon, a once proud millionaire, lost everything to gambling and greed. When he discovers his late wife's letter and the truth about their children, he embarks on a journey that will change his life forever. Before we dive into the story, let's do what Sleepless in Seattle taught us. Share where you're listening from. Comment below. Alejandro's Italian leather shoes click against marble, each step echoing through the mansion's empty halls. The sound follows him like an accusation as he fumbles with his key, missing the lock twice before managing to open his front door. The foyer spins slightly, too much scotch at the casino again, but he steadies himself against the wall, refusing to acknowledge the weakness in his legs. Moonlight spills through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting stark shadows across imported furniture, chosen by decorators whose names he's forgotten. The house smells wrong tonight, like stale air and abandonment, though the cleaning service came yesterday. Or was it last week? The days blur together lately. He shrugs off his suit jacket, letting it fall to the floor. The silk lining catches the light, reminding him of the way Isabella's hair used to shine in the morning sun. He kicks the jacket aside, banishing the thought. Lights, he commands, and the smart home system responds, flooding the space with harsh brightness that makes him wince. Everything gleams with the artificial perfection of a museum display. Crystal vases, abstract sculptures, gilt-framed mirrors that reflect a man he barely recognizes anymore. His collar is askew, his eyes bloodshot. He loosens his tie but doesn't remove it, needing something to hold on to as he makes his way to the bar cart. The crystal decanter feels too heavy in his hand. Scotch sloshes against the sides as he pours, spilling a few drops onto the marble countertop. The liquid catches the light like amber, like the rosary beads his mother used to pray with before he stopped visiting home. Before success made him too important for Sunday dinners and neighborhood festivals. Salud, he mutters to no one, raising the glass in a mock toast. The scotch burns going down, but it's a familiar pain, almost welcome. It dulls the edges of memory, the disappointed look in his mother's eyes when he missed his father's funeral, the way Isabella's voice cracked when she begged him to stop gambling, the sound of bottles breaking in their first real fight. His phone buzzes in his pocket. The caller ID shows his lawyer's number, and something cold settles in his stomach. Nothing good comes from legal calls at this hour. He lets it go to voicemail, taking another long drink instead. A framed photo catches his attention. Him and Isabella on their wedding day, her white dress a stark contrast against his black tuxedo. They're both laughing at something off camera, young and stupid with hope. His hands were steady then when he slipped the ring onto her finger. His promises felt solid as steel. "Some dream we had, mi amor," he says to the photograph, letting out a bitter laugh that sounds hollow, even to his own ears. The scotch is working now, softening the world's sharp edges, making it easier to ignore the pile of unopened mail on his desk. Bills and demands and threats dressed up in legal language. The phone buzzes again, same number. Alejandro downs the rest of his drink and pours another, larger this time. The voicemail notification blinks accusingly. "Fine," he mutters, pressing play. His lawyer's voice fills the room, tight with barely contained panic. "Alejandro, we need to talk about the margin calls. The bank won't extend any more credit, and the venture capital firm is threatening legal action. Call me back immediately. This isn't something you can ignore away." He deletes the message with a sharp jab of his finger. The venture will turn around. It has to. He just needs time, maybe another round of funding. His name still carries weight in certain circles. One good night at the tables could solve everything. The thought sparks something in him, a familiar itch, a surge of false confidence. He checks his watch. The high-stakes room at the casino will still be running for hours, just one more try, one more chance to prove he hasn't lost his touch. His reflection catches his eye as he reaches for his keys. For a moment, he sees himself as others might, disheveled, desperate, chasing ghosts of past glory. Something inside him cracks, a hairline fracture in his carefully constructed facade. "Shut up," he tells the mirror, but his voice sounds weak, uncertain. The scotch isn't working fast enough tonight. Memory slips through the cracks, his mother's voice singing old lullabies, Isabella's laughter echoing through their first apartment, the smell of his abuela's cooking on Sunday afternoons. He grabs the decanter instead of his keys, carrying it to the leather sofa that costs more than his father made in a year. The cushions are still stiff, barely used. No one visits anymore. Even the cleaning service leaves before he gets home, as if his solitude is contagious. Outside, the city glows like a false dawn. Somewhere out there, Isabella is probably still awake, going over production schedules for the farm. She always did her best work at night when the world was quiet enough to think. He imagines her at their old kitchen table, reading glasses perched on her nose, dark hair falling in her face as she bends over spreadsheets. His phone buzzes again. This time it's a text from his bookie, a reminder about yesterday's losses, a not-so-subtle threat about payment terms. Alejandro turns the phone face down on the coffee table, but not before catching a glimpse of the date. December has crept up on him again. Soon the city will be drowning in Christmas lights and forced cheer, while he drowns in scotch and self-pity. Last year, Isabella still bothered to put up decorations, trying to coax some holiday spirit from the mansion's cold corners. This year, the house will stay dark. The decanter is half empty now. Alejandro leans back, letting his head rest against the sofa. The ceiling spins slowly above him, and he closes his eyes against the motion. In the darkness behind his eyelids, memories flash like old film reels. His father's calloused hands teaching him to fix engines, his mother's patience as she helped with homework, helped Isabella's faith in him even when he didn't deserve it. I could have, he starts, but the words die in his throat. Could have what? Been better? Tried harder? Stayed true to the values his parents spent a life teaching him? The thoughts are too heavy, too sharp to hold on to. He lets them slip away, like everything else that matters. The scotch pulls him under, into uneasy dreams of falling. His last conscious thought is of Isabella's eyes on their wedding day, bright with a hope he hadn't earned then and betrayed since. The empty glass slips from his fingers, landing silently on the thick carpet as the night wraps around him like a shroud. Dawn breaks over the Morales farm in ribbons of gold and rose, painting the rows of crops in soft light. Isabella stands at the edge of the main field, clipboard in hand, watching workers move through the morning mist like ships through fog. Their voices carry across the damp air, a mix of Spanish and English that feels like home. Doña Isabella? Maria, one of the senior workers, hurries over with worry creasing her weathered face. The shipment from Phoenix. There's a problem with the manifests. Isabella nods, already reaching for her phone. The rhythm of crisis management is familiar, almost comforting compared to the uncertainty of her personal life. Show me, she says, following Maria toward the loading dock where 2 trucks idle in the gray morning light. The manifest discrepancy takes 20 minutes to sort out. Isabella mediates between the frustrated driver and her inventory manager, switching smoothly between languages until everyone understands the solution. It's the kind of problem-solving that comes naturally now, though she never imagined this would be her life when she was studying business at Stanford. Oye, Isabella. Doña Clara's voice cuts through her thoughts. The older woman approaches with a covered dish that steams in the cool morning air. You missed breakfast again. Gracias, pero no buts. Doña Clara presses the container into her hands. The baby needs food, even if the mother forgets to eat. Isabella's hand instinctively moves to her stomach, still flat enough to hide her secret. Babies, she corrects softly. The ultrasound showed 3. Doña Clara's eyes widen, then soften with understanding. Y el padre? Alejandro doesn't know. Isabella turns back to her clipboard, but Doña Clara's gentle touch on her arm stops her. He has a right. To what? To gamble away their future, too? The words come out sharper than intended. Isabella takes a breath, steadying herself. I'm sorry, it's been a long morning. Music drifts across the fields, rancheras from someone's radio mixing with children's laughter from the worker housing nearby. The sound wraps around her like a blanket, reminding her why she chose this life over the sterile luxury of Alejandro's world. The rest of the morning passes in a blur of decisions and discussions. Isabella moves through it all with practiced grace, her father's training evident in every choice she makes. Only in quiet moments, like now in her small office, does she allow herself to feel the weight of everything she's carrying. She opens her journal, adding another entry to the growing collection of letters she'll probably never send. My dear children, your father was once the most alive person I knew. He burned so bright it hurt to look at him sometimes. But brightness can blind you to shadows, and I learned too late that some fires consume everything they touch. A knock at the door interrupts her writing. Senora Morales? The bank is on the phone about the loan payment. Isabella closes the journal, tucking away her grief with practiced efficiency. There will be time for feelings later. Right now, her community needs her strength more than her tears. The familiar noise of the farm drifts through her window, tractors rumbling, workers calling to each other, the steady pulse of irrigation systems. It's a symphony of survival, of people working together to build something lasting, something worth protecting, even at the cost of a broken heart. Sheets of paper cover Alejandro's desk like fallen leaves, each one bearing worse news than the last. The numbers blur before his eyes as he tries to make sense of the latest financial reports. Red ink bleeds across the pages, marking the death of another venture. Impossible, he mutters, shoving the papers away. His laptop screen shows an equally grim story. Emails from investors pulling out, creditors demanding immediate payment, partners distancing themselves from what they clearly see as a sinking ship. His phone hasn't stopped buzzing all morning. Each vibration feels like another nail in his coffin. Finally, he answers one, just to make the noise stop. Mr. Bevon, his former partner's voice drips with false sympathy. The board has reviewed your proposal. Given recent developments, we feel it's best to terminate our relationship immediately. Alejandro's fist connects with the desk, sending papers fluttering to the floor. You can't just, we can and we have. The documentation is already with your lawyer. Don't make this messier than it needs to be. The call ends with a click that echoes in Alejandro's skull. Rage builds in his chest, hot and familiar. Without thinking, he sweeps everything off his desk. Papers, laptop, family photos, all crashing to the ground in a satisfying chaos. The sound brings Isabella running. She stands in the doorway, taking in the scene with those quiet, judging eyes he's grown to hate. Another bad day? Her voice is carefully neutral, a tone he recognizes from how she speaks to spooked horses on the farm. Don't. The word comes out like a growl. Don't stand there acting superior while you play farmer with daddy's money. That play farming is keeping us afloat. Isabella steps into the room, navigating around the debris of his tantrum. While you gamble away, shut up. He grabs the nearest object, a crystal paperweight, and hurls it at the wall. It shatters spectacularly, raining glass onto the imported rug. You have no idea what it takes to run a real business. No. Isabella's laugh is bitter as old coffee. I manage 500 acres and 60 workers. What I don't do is throw tantrums when things get hard. The truth in her words stings worse than any insult. Alejandro turns away, reaching for the bottle he keeps in his desk drawer. It's empty. Of course it's empty. We need to talk about the farm, he says, still not looking at her. There's a developer interested in the south pasture. If we sell... No. The word drops like a stone between them. That land has been in my family for generations. I won't let you sell it to cover your gambling debts. Let me? He turns then, anger making him cruel. You seem to forget who makes the decisions in this marriage. Do I? Isabella's voice is quiet but steel sharp. Like you've forgotten who still has controlling interest in that land. Who actually works while you play businessman? Their eyes meet across the wreckage of his office. For a moment, Alejandro sees himself reflected in her gaze, a pathetic figure surrounded by the ruins of his own making. The truth of it is unbearable. Get out, he whispers. When she doesn't move immediately, he roars, Get out! Isabella leaves without another word, closing the door softly behind her. The gentle click of the latch feels more final than any slam could have been. Christmas lights twinkle mockingly through the study windows, casting colored shadows across Alejandro's face as he pours another drink. The scotch bottle is nearly empty, like his bank accounts, like his promises of doing better. Isabella's voice drifts from downstairs. She's on the phone, speaking rapid Spanish with someone from the farm. Even now, she's working, building, creating. While he drains his glass, welcoming the familiar burn. The Christmas tree she insisted on decorating stands in the corner of their living room, a poor imitation of the joy it's supposed to represent. He hasn't bought her a gift, hasn't even thought about it, really. Unsteady feet carry him downstairs just as Isabella hangs up the phone. She looks tired, he notices distantly. There are shadows under her eyes that makeup doesn't quite hide. Working late again, his words slur slightly. Always so dedicated to your precious farm. Isabella doesn't rise to the bait. She just watches him with those careful eyes, like he's a bomb that might go off at any moment. The thought makes him angry. He's not the one who's failing here. You know what your problem is? He continues, moving closer. You're so busy playing Mother Teresa to every worker with a sad story, you can't even give me a child. The words land like physical blows. Isabella flinches, one hand moving unconsciously to her stomach. The gesture feeds his cruelty somehow, making him want to hurt her more. How many years have we tried? But no, you're too stressed, too busy with the farm. Maybe if you spent less time with other people's children and more time. Stop, her voice shakes. You're drunk. I'm honest. He grabs his wedding ring, twisting it off with violent force. And I'm done pretending this marriage is anything but a failure, like everything else you touch. The ring bounces off the wall behind her head, landing somewhere in the darkness beyond. Isabella doesn't flinch this time. She just looks at him with eyes full of something worse than anger. Disappointment. Merry Christmas, Alejandro, she says quietly, turning away. I hope someday you find whatever you're running from. He watches her walk away, straight-backed and dignified even now. The Christmas lights blur in his vision, creating halos of color that remind him of the stained glass windows in his mother's church. Of all the prayers, he's forgotten how to pray. Silence fills the mansion, broken only by the soft tick of expensive clocks counting down to midnight. Alejandro sits alone in his study, watching fireworks paint the sky in brief, brilliant bursts of color. Another year ending. Another chance at redemption slipping through his fingers like smoke. The usual New Year's Eve invitations sit unopened on his desk. Once, he would have been at the center of every celebration, the life of every party. Now the thought of facing his peers, their judgment barely hidden behind polite smiles, makes him reach for the bottle again. But it's empty, like his house, like his life. Restlessness drives him from his chair, sends him searching for his keys. He can't stay here with these walls closing in, with memories of Isabella's disappointment haunting every room. The local bar is nearly empty, not the kind of place he used to frequent, but tonight it feels right. The bartender doesn't recognize him, doesn't care about his name or his failures, just pours whiskey when he asks and leaves him alone with his thoughts. Alex Bevon. The voice comes from behind him, familiar in a way that makes his stomach clench. I heard you were back in the old neighborhood. Hector Alvarez slides onto the next stool, looking exactly as Alejandro remembers from his childhood. Silver hair swept back from a weathered face, eyes sharp with intelligence and something like sympathy. Don't. Alejandro stares into his glass. Whatever lecture you're planning, save it. Lecture? Hector orders a beer, settles in like he has all night. No lectures. Just wondering what happened to that bright-eyed kid who used to help me fix cars after school. The one who swore he'd make his mama proud. The words hit harder than any sermon could have. Alejandro takes another drink, trying to drown the memory of who he used to be. But Hector's presence makes it impossible to hide from the truth. About who he was, who he's become, what he's thrown away. As midnight approaches, the bar begins to fill. People greet Hector warmly, including him in their celebrations, while carefully avoiding Alejandro's dark corner. He watches them laugh together, share stories and hopes for the new year, and something inside him breaks. The man in the mirror behind the bar looks like a stranger. Expensive suit rumpled, eyes bloodshot, shoulders curved under the weight of his choices. His father would be ashamed to see him like this. His mother would cry. Isabella would just look at him with those quiet, knowing eyes, seeing right through his carefully constructed facades to the scared boy underneath. The bartender sets up a round of champagne for midnight. Alejandro stares at his glass, at the bubbles rising endlessly toward the surface, seeking escape. In their movement, he sees his whole life, always reaching for something more, something bigger, never satisfied with what he has until it's gone. As the countdown begins, he makes a decision. The champagne goes down the drain instead of down his throat. It's a small gesture, probably meaningless in the grand scheme of things, but it feels like the first honest choice he's made in years. Fireworks explode outside, painting the sky in temporary glory. Alejandro steps out of the bar into the cold night air, leaving Hector and the others to their celebrations. He has work to do, amends to make, if there's still time. The city glows around him, full of possibility and danger in equal measure. Somewhere out there, Isabella is starting her new year without him. Somewhere, his old self is waiting to be rediscovered. He begins walking, letting each step carry him further from the man he's been, closer to the man he needs to become. Sunlight stabs through Alejandro's eyelids like needles, each beam an accusation. His mouth tastes like ash and broken promises. The mansion's silence presses against his temples, broken only by the steady drip of the kitchen faucet he never bothered to fix. He finds the business card in his jacket pocket, crumpled but legible. Recovery meetings every morning, it reads in Hector's neat handwriting. Below that, an address in the old neighborhood. Alejandro's first instinct is to tear it up, but his fingers won't cooperate. The card seems to burn against his palm like a brand. The drive takes 20 minutes. Each intersection offers a chance to turn back, to crawl into a bottle and forget. But Hector's words from New Year's Eve echo in his skull. That bright-eyed kid who used to help me fix cars, the one who swore he'd make his mama proud. The community center smells like cheap coffee and desperation. Plastic chairs scrape against linoleum as people shuffle in, businessmen in rumpled suits, workers in paint-stained clothes, all avoiding eye contact. Alejandro takes a seat near the back, fighting the urge to run. "My name is Miguel," the first speaker says, "and I'm an alcoholic." The response comes in a tired chorus. "Hi, Miguel." Stories spill out like confessions. Lost jobs, broken marriages, children who won't return calls. Each word finds its mark in Alejandro's chest, precise as a surgeon's knife. When his turn comes, his throat closes around the words. I'm Alejandro." His voice sounds strange in his ears, stripped of its usual confidence. "And I've lost everything that matters." After the meeting, Hector finds him in the parking lot, leaning against his car like it's the only thing keeping him upright. "Isabella's gone," Hector says without preamble. "Left 3 days ago. Sold part of the farm to cover your debts first." The words hit harder than any hangover. "She what?" "Don't act surprised, Sabrino. You think she didn't know about the margin calls? The creditors?" "She sacrificed her family's legacy to save your name, then walked away. Can't say I blame her." Alejandro's legs give out. He slides down the car's side until he's sitting on the cold asphalt. "I need to find her, to explain." "Explain what?" Hector's voice carries decades of disappointment. How you gambled away her trust, how you chose alcohol over her dreams. Some things break too clean to fix, Alex. Back at the mansion, Alejandro finds paper and pen. The letter starts and stops a dozen times, each attempt more inadequate than the last. Finally, words come. "Mi amor, I don't know where to send this. Maybe that's fitting. I've lost the right to know where you are. But I need to say..." He writes until his hand cramps, until tears blur the ink. When he's done, he folds the pages carefully, like a prayer. There's no address to send them to. But the act of writing feels like the first honest thing he's done in years. The nursery door creaks open under his touch. They'd painted it together last spring, before everything fell apart. Isabella chose soft yellows and greens, refusing to wait for the fertility treatments to work. "Faith," she'd said, dabbing paint on his nose. "Sometimes you have to believe in something before it exists." Dust motes dance in the afternoon light, settling on the empty crib they'd picked out together. Alejandro's fingers traced the wooden rails, remembering how Isabella's eyes lit up when she saw it. "Perfect for twins," she'd said. Then, softer, or maybe more. His knees hit the carpet. Sobs tear from his throat, raw and animal. The sound echoes off walls that will never hear a child's laughter, never witness the family they'd planned to build. "I'm sorry," he whispers to the empty room. "I'm so fucking sorry." But sorry isn't enough. Sorry won't rebuild what he's destroyed. As the sun sets, casting long shadows through the nursery windows, Alejandro makes a decision. Tomorrow, he'll drive to the farm, face whatever reception waits, begin the long work of earning back what he's thrown away. The Morales farm sprawls across the valley like a patchwork quilt, each field a different shade of green. Workers move through the rows with practiced efficiency, their voices carrying on the morning breeze. The scene stirs something in Alejandro's chest, a memory of belonging he'd forgotten he could feel. Carlos Morales spots him before he reaches the main house. Isabella's brother crosses the yard with purpose, jaw set in a way that promises violence. You've got some nerve showing up here. Carlos's accent thickens with anger, the way it always does when he's close to losing control. Carlos, please, I need to. Need? The word cracks like a whip. Like we needed the South pasture, the one Isabella had to sell to cover your gambling debts? The revelation hits Alejandro like a physical blow. She sold. But that land's been in your family for 3 generations. Carlos steps closer, close enough that Alejandro can see the vessels standing out in his eyes. My grandfather worked that land until his hands bled, but you wouldn't know about work, would you? About sacrifice? I've changed, Alejandro says, but the words sound hollow even to his ears. I'm getting help. If I could just talk to Isabella. Changed? Carlos laughs, an ugly sound. Let me tell you about change, cuñado. I watched my sister cry herself sick over you. Watched her sell our heritage to protect your reputation. You want to know what real change looks like? Look at the calluses on these hands. Look at the families who depend on this farm. That's the legacy you gambled away. Please. Alejandro's voice cracks. I'll do anything. Anything? Carlos spits on the ground between them. Then stay away. Let Isabella heal. Go back to your mansion and your scotch and leave what's left of our family in peace. The drive home stretches like a fever dream. Fields blur past his windows, each one a reminder of what he's lost. The South pasture. He remembers Isabella's stories about learning to ride there, about her grandfather teaching her the names of every plant that grew wild along the fences. Gone now. Sold to cover his debts. The thought makes him pull over, bile rising in his throat. When he can breathe again, Alejandro turns the car around, not toward home. The mansion stopped being home the moment Isabella left. Instead, he heads for the community that grew up around the farm. Time to face the people he's wronged. One apology at a time. The local market comes first. Maria, who runs it with her daughters, doesn't look up from her register when he enters. Mrs. Ruiz, he starts, using the formal address she prefers. I came to. We don't extend credit anymore. Her voice could freeze hell. Not since your last bounced check almost cost us our license. I know. I'm here to make it right. He pulls out his wallet, hands her a stack of bills, with interest. She counts it twice, eyes narrowing. Money doesn't fix everything, Mr. Bevon. No, he agrees, but it's a start. The pattern repeats across town. Some refuse to see him, others take his money with cold silence. A few curse him in rapid Spanish, words his mother would have washed his mouth out for knowing. He accepts it all, each rejection another step on the path to what? Redemption? Or just penance? The community festival catches him by surprise. Music spills from the church courtyard, mixing with children's laughter and the smell of grilling meat. For a moment, muscle memory almost draws him in. He used to belong here once, before ambition and addiction carved him hollow. The silence spreads like ripples when people spot him. Conversations die mid-sentence. Children are pulled closer to parents' sides. Someone whispers, "Sinvergüenza," loud enough for him to hear. The rock catches him in the shoulder, small, thrown more in anger than to truly hurt. A child's voice rings out, "Fuera, you don't belong here anymore." He doesn't run. Running is what the old Alejandro would have done. Instead, he walks to his car with measured steps, back straight against the weight of their stairs. Safe behind tinted windows, he pulls out the stack of letters he keeps in the glove compartment. Isabella's handwriting fills each page, hopes and dreams laid bare in blue ink. The farm isn't just land, one letter reads. It's a promise. To the workers who depend on us. To the community that's grown around us. To the future we're building together. The words blur as tears threaten. He blinks them back, remembering Carlos's contempt. Crying won't rebuild what he's broken. Action will. He finds Hector at his auto shop, hands deep in an engine's guts. How do I fix this? Alejandro asks without preamble. Not the money. I know that'll take time. But the trust, the respect. Hector wipes his hands on a rag, considering. You trying to win Isabella back? I'm trying to become someone worth forgiving. The distinction feels important somehow. Someone who deserves to be part of this community again. Then stop talking about it. Hector's eyes are hard but not unkind. Show them. Work like they work. Sweat like they sweat. Prove you understand what it means to build something lasting. The next morning finds Alejandro at Doña Clara's door. The old woman has been the farm's heart since before he was born. It's memory keeper and conscience. If anyone can give him a chance, it's her. She lets him stand on her porch for 10 minutes before opening the door. The smell of fresh coffee wafts out, achingly familiar. Por favor, he says, the Spanish feeling rusty on his tongue. I want to work, to learn. Work? Her eyebrows rise. Your soft hands won't last a day in the fields. Then they'll bleed, he says simply, and heal stronger. She studies him for a long moment, seeing past the designer clothes to something deeper. Finally, she nods once. Dawn tomorrow. Don't be late. The work nearly breaks him that first day. His back screams protest at each bend and lift. Blisters form and burst on palms more used to signing contracts than gripping tools. The other workers ignore him completely. He might as well be a ghost haunting their fields. But he comes back. Day after day, he returns, learns the rhythm of planting and harvest, feels muscles strengthen and skin toughen under the relentless sun. When Miguel's son falls ill with fever, Alejandro volunteers to cover his shift, works double hours until the boy recovers. He doesn't expect thanks, doesn't deserve it, but something shifts in the way the other workers look at him. Weeks blur together. His designer suits gather dust while calluses build on his hands. The mansion's silence drives him to accept Doña Clara's offer of a small room above her garage. The space smells like motor oil and fresh laundry, more home than his empty palace ever was. One evening after a particularly grueling day, someone hands him a plate at dinner. The gesture is small, but its meaning isn't lost on him. He's being included, tentatively, in the community's daily rituals. La Señora Morales, one of the older workers, says as they eat, she always made sure we had good food, said a family eats together. Others join in, sharing stories about Isabella's kindness, her fierce protection of the farm and its people. Each word is a knife in Alejandro's heart, but he welcomes the pain. It reminds him what he's fighting for. Later, alone in his borrowed room, Alejandro adds another letter to the growing stack he can't send. Mi amor. Today, I learned how to tell when the tomatoes are perfectly ripe, how to feel the subtle give beneath their skin. I thought of your hands, how they always knew exactly when to harvest, when to wait. I'm learning patience, finally. Learning to build instead of destroy, he falls asleep to the distant sound of crickets, dreaming of redemption measured in seasons and soil. Morning dew clings to Alejandro's borrowed work boots as he crosses the farm's central courtyard. His muscles ache from yesterday's labor, muscles he'd forgotten existed during his years behind mahogany desks. The sound of kitchen activity draws him toward Doña Clara's modest house, where warm light spills from windows fogged with cooking steam. He hesitates at her door, hand raised to knock. 2 weeks of working on the Morales farm have earned him little more than suspicious glances and curt responses. But Doña Clara, despite her obvious wariness, has shown him small kindnesses. A cup of coffee here, a word of advice there. Perhaps she'll grant him a moment of her time. His knuckles barely graze the wooden door when it swings open. Doña Clara stands in the doorway, wrapped in a faded apron that smells of fresh tortillas and history. Alejandro Bevon, she says, his name carrying the weight of judgment in her mouth. What brings you to my door so early? He swallows hard, tasting dust and pride. I need to understand. Something in his voice must convince her because she steps aside, gesturing him into a kitchen that feels more lived in than his entire mansion ever did. Family photos cover the walls, generations of faces linked by blood and belonging. His eyes catch on one showing a younger Isabella, her arms around a group of children from the worker housing. Sit. Doña Clara points to a worn chair at her small table. Steam rises from 2 cups of tea she's already set out, as if she'd been expecting him. What do you want to understand? The question feels bigger than this moment, bigger than this room. Alejandro wraps his calloused hands around the warm cup, searching for words that won't sound hollow. Isabella, he manages finally. The choices she made. I thought I knew her, but working here, seeing what she built. He trails off, lost in the vastness of his ignorance. Doña Clara studies him over the rim of her cup, her eyes dark with memories. You want the truth, hijo? Even if it hurts? Please. She sets down her cup with deliberate care. Isabella was pregnant when she left you. The words hit like physical blows. Alejandro's cup slips from suddenly numb fingers, tea splashing across the table. Doña Clara doesn't move to clean it up, letting the liquids spread like the truth she's unleashing. Pregnant? His voice cracks on the word. But we tried for years. 3 babies, Doña Clara continues, each word precise and cutting. She found out the week before Christmas, the night you threw your wedding ring at her head. Bile rises in Alejandro's throat. He remembers that night in fragments, scotch-soaked anger, cruel words, the glint of gold as the ring flew past Isabella's face. He'd aimed to miss, he tells himself now, but the truth of his violence sits heavy in his stomach. Why didn't she tell me? You were drunk more often than sober, gambling away everything she tried to build. Doña Clara's voice holds no accusation, only stated fact. She had to protect them, Los Bebés and the farm. While you were losing millions at poker tables, she was selling pieces of her family's legacy to cover your debts. Each revelation lands like another nail in the coffin of his former self. Alejandro stares at his hands, soft banker's hands slowly being reshaped by honest work, and sees them as weapons that destroyed his own happiness. How much? He whispers. The south pasture, 200 acres, the old vineyard, the processing facility her grandfather built. Doña Clara ticks off the sacrifices on work-worn fingers, but she kept the heart of the farm alive, kept the community together. Even when the doctors told her the stress might harm the babies, she worked 18-hour days to save what she could. Alejandro pushes back from the table, stumbling to his feet. The kitchen's warmth feels suffocating now. Through the window, he watches workers moving through the morning mist, their voices carrying across the damp air in a mixture of Spanish and English that speaks of belonging. I should have protected them, he says, more to himself than Doña Clara. Instead, I was the thing they needed protection from. See, Doña Clara's agreement holds no comfort. But you're here now, trying to understand. That's something. He turns back to her, seeing in her weathered face echoes of his own mother's disappointment. Is it enough? That depends on what you do with the understanding. She stands, gathering their cups with efficient movements. Isabella believed in second chances. Even at the end, she believed you could change. The words stop his breath. At the end? Doña Clara pauses, recognition flickering across her features. Ah, you don't know. She sets the cups down with a gentle clink. Sit, he-ho. There's more you need to hear. But Alejandro can't sit, can't breathe, can't process the implications in her tone. He backs toward the door, suddenly desperate for air. I need, the words tangle in his throat. I can't. He flees into the morning light, past curious workers and judging eyes. His feet carry him to the edge of the main field where he and Isabella once planned to build a new processing facility. The ground beneath him feels solid, real, while his world tilts on its axis. Pregnant. She was pregnant. And he'd driven her away with drunken cruelty, forced her to sacrifice her heritage to cover his mistakes. The magnitude of his failures threatens to crush him. The sound of approaching footsteps pulls him from his spiral. Carlos Morales, Isabella's brother, current overseer of the farm, stands a few feet away, something clutched in his hand. Doña Clara called, he says, voice carefully neutral. Said you finally learned the truth. Alejandro can't meet his eyes. Some of it. Come with me. It's not a request. Carlos leads him to the old farmhouse where generations of Morales children grew up. The front porch still holds the swing where Isabella used to read during summer evenings that back when they were first married and everything seemed possible. They enter Carlos's study, once Isabella's father's office, now cluttered with farming papers and family photos. Carlos closes the door, shutting out the morning bustle. She left this for you. He holds out an envelope, Alejandro's name written in Isabella's elegant hand. Said I should give it to you if you ever came back, if you seemed ready to understand. The paper feels impossibly heavy in Alejandro's trembling hands. He sinks into a chair, staring at his name written by fingers he'll never hold again. I'll give you privacy, Carlos says, moving toward the door. He pauses, hand on the knob. But Alejandro, if this is another game to you, another manipulation, just know there are 200 workers here who loved my sister like family. Remember that before you make any decisions. The door closes with a soft click, leaving Alejandro alone with Isabella's last words to him. Moonlight streams through the study window, painting patterns across the envelope that remind him of the way light used to play across Isabella's face in their early morning moments. His fingers trace her handwriting, remembering how she used to leave him little notes in his briefcase, reminders to eat lunch, wishes for good luck, declarations of love he'd stopped appreciating somewhere along the way. With shaking hands, he breaks the seal. Mi querido Alejandro, if you're reading this, it means you've taken the first steps toward understanding. I hope you've seen our community, really seen it, and begun to grasp what I've always tried to show you about the power of belonging. I loved you, Alex. Even at our worst moments, I loved the man I first met, the one who talked about changing the world, who looked at my family's farm and saw not just crops, but legacy. But love isn't enough when it flows only one way. You need to know that I forgive you, not for your sake, but for mine and for our children. Yes, children, 3 beautiful souls who will carry both our bloodlines, both our stories. I couldn't tell you about them then. You were too lost in your own darkness, too dangerous in your desperation. I had to protect them, even if it meant breaking both our hearts. But forgiveness isn't the same as trust. If you truly want to make amends to be worthy of knowing your children, there are conditions. First, repay the value of what was lost. The land I sold to cover your debts was worth $500 million, not just in money, but in heritage, in dreams, in possibilities stolen from future generations. Find a way to restore what was taken. Second, work. Not from an office, not through proxies, but with your hands in the soil that feeds our people. Understand the weight of every decision I made, every sacrifice required to keep this community alive while you gambled away our future. Third, sobriety. Complete and sustained, not just from alcohol and gambling, but from the addiction to chaos that's ruled your life. Our children deserve a father who chooses peace over destruction. I dream of a day when our babies might know their father as the man he could be, not the man he was. When they might walk this land and feel pride in both sides of their heritage. The choice, as always, is yours. But know this, whether you rise to meet these conditions or fade back into your old life, I will make sure our children know love, know community, know the strength that comes from belonging to something bigger than themselves. Con amor y esperanza, Isabella. The letter slips from Alejandro's fingers, floating to the floor like autumn leaves. His chest feels too tight, each breath a struggle against the weight of truth. Through the window, he watches workers moving through the evening light, their shadows stretching long across fields that should have been his children's inheritance. The magnitude of what he's lost, what he's thrown away, threatens to overwhelm him. But beneath the grief, something else stirs. Something that feels like purpose, like possibility, like the first fragile shoots of hope breaking through hard soil. Dawn breaks over the Morales farm, painting the sky in shades of promise. Alejandro stands before Carlos in the main office, his borrowed work clothes still carrying yesterday's dirt. I want to stay, he says, voice steady despite his racing heart. Not just to work, to fulfill Isabella's conditions. All of them. Carlos leans back in his chair, skepticism written in every line of his face. And we should trust this sudden conversion. Why? Instead of answering immediately, Alejandro reaches into his pocket and pulls out his Patek Philippe watch, a $100,000 symbol of his former life. This was the first thing I bought when my company went public, he says, laying it on the desk between them. I'd like to sell it, use the money to buy seeds for the Southfield rotation. Carlos picks up the watch, studying it in the morning light. One expensive watch doesn't make up for years of destruction. No, Alejandro agrees. But it's a start. He straightens his shoulders, feeling the honest ache of yesterday's labor. I have a lot to learn about farming, about community, about being the kind of man Isabella believed I could be. I'm asking for a chance to try. Something shifts in Carlos's expression. Not quite acceptance, but perhaps its distant cousin. He sets the watch down carefully. You'll start in the fields, he says finally. Same as any new worker. No special treatment, no shortcuts. One mistake, one drink, one gambling slip, one moment of the old Alejandro, and you're gone. Understood? Understood. Carlos stands, moving to the window that overlooks the morning activity. Workers are already gathering for the day's assignments, their voices carrying up like a familiar song. Isabella never stopped believing you could change, he says quietly. Even after everything, she saw something in you worth saving. He turns back to Alejandro, eyes hard with challenge. Don't prove her wrong. Not again. Alejandro nods, understanding the weight of the moment. As he turns to leave, Carlos's voice stops him. The north field needs clearing before we can plant. Report to Maria, she'll show you where to start. It's not forgiveness, not acceptance, but it's a beginning. Alejandro steps out into the morning light, feeling the sun on his face like a benediction. The farm spreads out before him, a tapestry of life and labor, of history and hope. Somewhere in the distance, a tractor rumbles to life. Birds call to each other across fields that hold generations of stories in their soil. Alejandro takes a deep breath, tasting possibility on the morning air. Then he walks toward the tool shed, ready to begin the long journey from the man he was to the man his children might someday be proud to know. Each step feels like a prayer, like a promise, like the first words of a story he's finally ready to tell. Dawn breaks over the Morales farm like a benediction, painting the fields in shades of gold and amber. Alejandro's hands, once soft with privilege, now bear calluses from weeks of honest work. He runs his palm along a cornstalk, feeling the moisture of morning dew against his skin. The plant stands tall and green, a testament to the careful attention he's learned to give. You're early today. Carlos Morales' voice carries across the field, more observation than greeting. Even after weeks of working side by side, Isabella's brother maintains a careful distance. Alejandro straightens, wiping sweat from his forehead with a sleeve that's more patched than whole. Wanted to check the new irrigation lines before the crew arrives. The words come naturally now, agricultural terms that once felt foreign on his tongue. Think we might need to adjust the pressure on the north section. Carlos studies him with eyes that miss nothing, that see past the borrowed work clothes to the man Alejandro used to be. Finally, he nods. Show me. They walk the rows together, discussing soil composition and water distribution with the seriousness of surgeons reviewing charts. Alejandro points out spots where the earth feels too dry, explaining his idea for a rainwater collection system that could supplement their current setup. It would cut costs, he says, sketching diagrams in the dirt with a stick, and give us a buffer during dry spells. He doesn't mention how he learned about sustainable water management, hours spent in the farm's small library after sunset, poring over agricultural texts until his eyes burned. Costs. Carlos's mouth twists around the word. Like the cost of the land Isabella had to sell to cover your gambling debts? The accusation lands like a physical blow. Alejandro forces himself to meet his brother-in-law's gaze. I can't change the past, he says quietly, but I can learn from it, help build something better. Before Carlos can respond, voices drift across the field, workers arriving for the day shift. Among them is Doña Clara, carrying her usual basket of breakfast tamales. Her weathered face breaks into a smile when she spots Alejandro. Mírate, she calls out, already working while others still sleep. She presses a warm tamale into his hands despite his protests. You're too thin. How will you keep up with the harvest if you don't eat? The simple kindness threatens to undo him. Alejandro takes a bite to hide his emotion, savoring flavors that remind him of his own mother's cooking. Around him, the farm comes alive. Tractors rumbling to life, workers calling greetings in a mix of Spanish and English, the steady rhythm of a community working in harmony. He joins a group repairing fence posts, muscles burning with familiar strain. The physical labor grounds him, keeps his mind from wandering to darker places. To the mansion he sold, the life he left behind, the weight of Isabella's conditions for reconciliation. Hey, Alejandro. Miguel, one of the younger workers, waves him over. Come see what we found in the south field. It's a family of rabbits, nestled in the shelter of old irrigation pipes. The mother watches them warily while her kits tumble over each other, oblivious to human observers. We should move them, Miguel says, before the new pipes go in. Alejandro studies the scene, remembering countless business decisions made without consideration for those affected. No, he decides. We'll adjust the layout, work around them until the kits are old enough to move on their own. Miguel's surprise shows plainly on his face. But won't that take longer? Cost more? Some things are worth protecting. Alejandro's voice carries, and he notices Carlos watching from nearby. Sometimes the most valuable path isn't the most efficient one. The morning stretches into afternoon, marked by small victories and shared meals. During lunch, Alejandro sits with the workers, listening to stories about their families, their hopes, their struggles. He contributes to a collection for Rosa's son's college textbooks, remembering how his own father scraped together money for his education. Later, reviewing plans for the rainwater system, he catches sight of his reflection in the office window. The man looking back bears little resemblance to the polished executive he once was. His skin is tanned from outdoor work, his designer clothes replaced by worn denim and flannel. But his eyes are clear now, free from the haunted look that used to follow him from casino to bar. "The storm season's coming," Carlos says, joining him at the window. He gestures to the calendar on the wall, its pages marked with weather predictions and planting schedules. "Those collection tanks of yours better be ready." Hey. The words carry a weight of provisional trust, hard-earned through weeks of shared labor. Alejandro nods, understanding both the practical and personal implications. They will be. We will be. As sunset paints the sky in fierce oranges and purples, the workers gather for their end-of-day meeting. Alejandro stands slightly apart, still conscious of his position as an outsider seeking redemption. But when he outlines his proposals for improving the irrigation system, heads nod in agreement. A few workers even offer suggestions, building on his ideas with generations of farming knowledge. The day ends with a small celebration, a successful mid-season harvest marked by music and shared food in the communal dining area. Children play between the tables while their parents discuss crop yields and market prices. Alejandro helps serve plates of Doña Clara's famous pozole, earning smiles and murmured thanks. In quiet moments, his thoughts drift to Isabella. She would recognize the changes in him, he thinks. Would she approve of his efforts? Or is he still just playing at redemption, like he once played at being a responsible businessman? The weathered calendar catches his eye again, distinct its pages marking not just the approaching storms, but the passage of time since she left, since he began this journey from the ruins of his old life towards something real, something worth building. Thunder rumbles in the distance, a reminder of nature's indifference to human plans. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new opportunities to prove himself worthy of the second chance he's been given. For now, though, Alejandro lets himself be part of this moment, this community that has begun, despite everything, to feel like home. The storm hits without warning 3 days later, turning morning twilight to premature night. Rain hammers against windows and metal roofs while wind howls through the fields like a hungry animal. Alejandro races between buildings, shouting instructions over the chaos. "Get the tractors under cover!" His voice barely carries above the storm. "Miguel, help secure the greenhouse. Watch those power lines." Workers scatter to their assigned tasks, moving with the efficiency of long practice. But this storm is different, fiercer than anything in recent memory. Lightning splits the sky, followed instantly by thunder that shakes the ground. The barn roof. Someone screams in Spanish. Alejandro turns in time to see sheets of metal peeling away like paper, flying into the darkness. Rain pours through the opening, threatening stored equipment and this season's seed stock. Without thinking, he runs toward the danger. Carlos appears beside him, matching his stride. Together, they fight their way up the ladder, using their bodies as shields against the wind, while other workers pass up ropes and tools. "Hold this," Alejandro shouts, securing a length of cable around a roof beam. His hands are numb with cold, clothes soaked through. One slip would send him plummeting to the concrete floor below. But he thinks of Isabella, of all she sacrificed to protect this place, and finds strength to continue. Hours blur together as they battle the storm. Alejandro moves from crisis to crisis, helping rescue livestock from flooding pens, organizing teams to reinforce drainage channels, making split-second decisions that could mean the difference between survival and ruin. Finally, the wind dies down, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Dawn reveals the storm's true cost. Fields of young corn lie flattened, irrigation lines snake uselessly across muddy ground. The barn roof gapes open to the sky like a wound. "Dios mío," Doña Clara whispers, surveying the damage. Other workers gather slowly, faces drawn with exhaustion and worry. Alejandro begins walking the property with Carlos, notepad in hand. They catalog each loss methodically: crops destroyed, equipment damaged, structures compromised. The numbers paint a grim picture. "How bad?" Rosa asks when they return. She's worked these fields for 20 years, raised 3 children on their harvest. Bad, Carlos admits, but not impossible. Alejandro studies his notes, mind already working on solutions. We can salvage about 60% of the corn if we act fast. The irrigation system needs complete restructuring. But he looks up at the worried faces around him. We'll get through this. Together. He organizes recovery teams, drawing on skills honed in corporate boardrooms, but tempered now by weeks of physical labor. Each worker's strengths are matched to specific tasks. Children too young to help are set up with games in the community center, leaving parents free to work. The sun beats down mercilessly as Alejandro helps repair irrigation lines, muscles screaming from hours of lifting and digging. He overhears whispers, some blaming his presence for their bad luck, others defending his right to be there. "Él tiene la sangre mala," one older worker mutters. Bad blood brings bad fortune. The words sting, but Alejandro doesn't stop working. Instead, he stays later than anyone, using a headlamp to continue repairs long after sunset. His hands blister and crack, but each fixed pipe feels like a step toward redemption. Days pass in a blur of crisis management and physical labor. Alejandro sleeps only a few hours at a time, eating whatever Doña Clara forces into his hands between tasks. Slowly, impossibly, order begins emerging from chaos. He's checking repaired irrigation lines one evening when he notices he's not alone. A group of workers has stayed behind, led by Miguel and Rosa. Without a word, they pick up tools and join him. "You don't have to," he begins. "Cállate," Rosa interrupts. "We're community here. Even you." The simple acceptance brings a lump to his throat. They work together until full dark, the beam of Alejandro's headlamp supplemented by phone flashlights and borrowed lanterns. When the last line is secured, someone produces bottles of beer and tamales wrapped in foil. They sit in a rough circle on overturned buckets, sharing food and quiet conversation. The night air carries the scent of damp earth and growing things. Alejandro listens to stories of other storms, other recoveries, feeling the weight of shared history and resilience. Later, walking back to his small room in the workers' quarters, he passes the office. Light spills from under the door. Carlos working late again. Alejandro hesitates, then knocks. "Come in." Inside, papers cover every surface. Carlos looks up from a stack of insurance forms, exhaustion evident in the lines of his face. "The Northfield irrigation is back online," Alejandro reports. "We should be able to save most of those crops." Carlos nods. "Good work." He pauses, seeming to wrestle with something. "You didn't have to stay after the storm. Could have gone back to your old life." "No." Alejandro meets his brother-in-law's gaze. "I couldn't." Understanding passes between them. Not quite trust, not yet, but something like respect. Then a phone rings, shattering the moment. Carlos answers, his expression darkening as he listens. "They're here," he says after hanging up. "Your creditors. They're demanding payment." Alejandro's stomach clenches. The past he's been running from has finally caught up, threatening everything he's worked to build. "How much?" he asks quietly. "More than we can spare, especially now." Carlos's voice hardens. "You brought this danger to our door, Alejandro. To her door." The accusation hangs between them like smoke. Outside, crickets chirp in the darkness, oblivious to human concerns. Alejandro thinks of the workers who stayed late to help him, of Doña Clara's kindness, of Isabella's faith in this place and these people. "I'll handle it," he promises, "without risking the farm." But as he walks back to his room, the weight of his past feels heavier than ever. The creditors won't wait long, and this time there's more at stake than just his own future. The creditors arrive the next morning in expensive cars that look absurd on the farm's dirt roads. Their polished shoes and crisp suits remind Alejandro of who he used to be, making his worn work clothes feel like a costume. Mr. Bevon. Marcus Chen, his former investment partner, manages to make the name sound like an insult. Quite a change of scenery. Alejandro leads them to the small office, aware of workers watching from the fields. Inside, he faces the men who once called him friend, back when friendship meant sharing private jets and VIP lounges. "The terms haven't changed," Marcus says, spreading documents across the desk. "You owe us $8 million plus interest. We've been patient, Alex, but that patience has limits." The amount hangs in the air like poison. Alejandro studies the papers, mind racing. He could sell his remaining assets, the sports car gathering dust in storage. his investment portfolio, the last pieces of his old life. But it wouldn't be enough. I need more time, he starts, but Marcus cuts him off. Time's up, pay what you owe, or we'll take it from the farm. Our lawyers assure us your marriage to Miss Morales gives us claim to... No. The word comes out like steel. The farm is off limits. Marcus's smile doesn't reach his eyes. The Alex Bevon I knew would understand business is business, nothing personal. The Alex Bevon you knew is gone. Alejandro stands, something powerful and protective rising in his chest. I'll get your money, but not from here. Not from these people. These people? Marcus laughs. Listen to yourself. Playing farmer, pretending to be one of them? Wake up, Alex. This isn't your world. The words echo in the small office, striking uncomfortably close to Alejandro's own doubts. But he thinks of early mornings in the fields, of shared meals and harder shared labor, of trust slowly earned through actions rather than words. You're right, he says quietly. It wasn't my world, but I'm making it mine one day at a time, and I won't let you threaten it. Touching. Marcus stands, straightening his designer tie. You have 48 hours to arrange payment. After that, we'll do this the hard way. They leave tire tracks in the wet earth, another wound for the farm to absorb. Alejandro watches them go, feeling the weight of his choices, past and present, pressing down like storm clouds. Workers whisper in the fields, news spreading through the tight-knit community. Some avoid his eyes. Others, like Rosa and Miguel, move closer, offering silent support. Carlos finds him later in the barn, repairing tools with methodical focus. How bad? He asks simply. Alejandro sets down his wrench. 8 million, plus interest. Silence stretches between them, broken only by distant tractor noise and the call of birds. The farm can't take another hit, Carlos says finally. Not after the storm, not with harvest coming. I know. Alejandro runs a hand through hair, damp with honest sweat. I'll figure something out. How? More gambling? More schemes? No. The denial comes instantly, powered by months of sobriety and hard-won clarity. I have assets left. Not enough, but I'll find a way that doesn't touch the farm. Carlos studies him with eyes so like Isabella's, it hurts. She believed in you, even at the end, said you'd find your way back to who you really are. The words hit harder than any threat. Alejandro turns away, blinking against sudden moisture in his eyes. I have to see Doña Clara, he says roughly. Ask her advice. He finds the older woman in her garden, tending herbs she uses to heal everything from fever to heartbreak. She listens without interrupting as he explains the situation. Ah, mijito. She gestures for him to sit beside her on a weathered bench. The past never lets go easily, does it? But tell me, what matters most, the money or the people? The people, he answers without hesitation. This community, what Isabella built here. Then you know what you have to do. She pats his hand, soiled dark beneath her nails. Sometimes we must lose everything to find what matters most. Alejandro stares at the neat rows of herbs, remembering the careful plans he once made in boardrooms, the fortunes built and lost on snippets of code and market predictions. All that seems hollow now, compared to the solid reality of seeds pushing through soil, of communities bound by more than profit margins. Back in his small room, he opens his laptop, one of the few luxuries he kept. His investment portfolio glows on the screen, numbers that once seemed like security now just waits to be shed. The sports car in storage, the remaining stocks, his retirement accounts. It won't cover everything, but it's a start. His fingers hover over the keyboard. One click and he'll have nothing left of his old life. No safety net, no escape route. The thought should terrify him. Instead, he feels strangely light, like setting down a burden he's carried too long. A knock at the door interrupts his thoughts. It's Miguel, looking uncomfortable in the growing dark. The others, we wanted you to know, he shifts from foot to foot. We took up a collection. It's not much, but he holds out a coffee can, coins and crumpled bills visible inside. Alejandro's throat tightens at the gesture, at the sacrifice it represents from people who already have so little. No, he says gently, pushing the can back into Miguel's hands. But thank you. Knowing you would try, that means everything. After Miguel leaves, Alejandro turns back to his laptop. The cursor blinks on the sell order form, waiting for his decision. Outside his window, the farm settles into evening rhythms. Mothers calling children in for dinner, tractors returning to their sheds, birds singing their last songs of the day. He thinks of Isabella, of her quiet strength and unwavering dedication to this place, of her final letter laying out the conditions for his redemption. The choice isn't really a choice at all. His finger clicks the mouse. Assets liquidate in cascading screens of red and green, years of careful investment disappearing in moments. When it's done, he closes the laptop and steps outside. The evening air carries the scent of growing things, of earth recovering from the storm's violence. Workers pass with nods of acknowledgement, some stopping to share news or ask advice about tomorrow's tasks. No one mentions the creditors or the whispered rumors of doom. In the distance, the damaged barn stands silhouetted against the sunset, its broken roof a reminder of all that needs fixing. But up close, you can see the new boards, the fresh paint, the careful repairs made by many hands working together. Alejandro walks the fields one last time that night, touching corn stalks and feeling the promise in their growth. Whatever comes tomorrow, this place has taught him truths about wealth and worth that no boardroom ever could. The moon rises over the Morales farm, painting everything in silver light. Somewhere out there, Isabella is waiting to see if he'll finally become the man she always believed he could be. For the first time since she left, Alejandro feels ready to try. Alejandro stands in his study, surrounded by cardboard boxes labeled in his precise handwriting. Morning light filters through bare windows, no longer softened by the designer curtains he'd spent a fortune on years ago. The room feels larger without its expensive furniture, almost echoing with emptiness. His phone buzzes. Another message from the realtor. The mansion's sale is final. He should feel something about this, he thinks. Regret maybe, or at least nostalgia. Instead, there's only a quiet certainty as he picks up the last box. The sound of his footsteps follows him through the hollow rooms, each one stripped of the pretensions he'd accumulated like armor. No more crystal decanters catching light, no more abstract paintings chosen for their price tags rather than their beauty. Just clean walls and bare floors, waiting for someone else's dreams. In his private office, former office, he corrects himself, only one item remains. A polished plaque declaring him Entrepreneur of the Year. He lifts it from its prominent spot, remembering the night he received it. How proud he'd been, standing at that podium in his $1,000 suit, thinking he'd finally proved something to the world. The plaque feels heavier than it should as he carries it to the box by the door. Before he can place it inside, his fingers catch on something taped to its back. A photograph, edges worn and yellowed. His breath catches. It's from the Morales farm, taken that first summer after he married Isabella. Workers gathered for the harvest festival, faces bright with laughter. He's there too, sleeves rolled up, arm around Isabella, looking impossibly young and happy. Damn, he whispers, throat tight. That version of himself had no idea what was coming, no idea how thoroughly he'd destroy everything that mattered. He leaves the plaque in the trash where it belongs, but the photograph he places carefully in his wallet. Then he picks up a pen, settling at the bare desk one last time. There are letters to write, to creditors, former partners, everyone he's wronged. The words come slowly at first, then faster as he forces himself to face the truth of his actions. I write not to excuse my behavior, he begins each one, but to acknowledge the harm I've caused and explain the steps I'm taking to make amends. The sun climbs higher as he works, casting different shadows across the empty room. By the time he signs the last letter, his hand aches and his back is stiff, but something has loosened in his chest. It feels like setting down a weight he's carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. Outside, a modest pickup truck waits in the circular driveway. It's nothing like the luxury cars that used to fill this space, but its scratched paint and worn seats feel honest in a way his former possessions never did. He loads the few boxes he's keeping into the truck bed, each one containing only what he truly needs or what connects him to the person he's trying to become. The mansion's keys feel small in his palm as he takes one last look at the facade. How many nights did he stumble through that front door, drunk on scotch and self-pity? How many mornings did he leave without saying goodbye to Isabella, too focused on his next deal to notice her growing silence? He drops the keys into the waiting realtor's hand. It's all yours, he says, voice steady. The proceeds should hit the account this afternoon. Are you sure about this, Mr. Bevon? The realtor glances between him and the mansion. The market might improve if you wait. I'm sure. Alejandro opens the truck's door, the hinges creaking in protest. Someone else can make this house a home. I've got somewhere else to be. The engine turns over with a rough cough, so different from the purring luxury cars he used to drive. As he pulls away, Alejandro catches a glimpse of himself in the rearview mirror. His designer suits are gone, replaced by worn jeans and a work shirt. His hair, once perfectly styled, is touched with gray at the temples, but his eyes look clearer than they have in years. The mansion grows smaller in his mirrors until it disappears around a bend. Ahead, the road stretches toward the Morales farm, toward whatever redemption he might still earn. Alejandro adjusts his grip on the steering wheel, feeling the calluses he's developed from real work. The morning sun warms his face through the cracked windshield, and for the first time in longer than he can remember, he feels like he's driving toward something instead of away. The Morales farm appears on the horizon like a mirage, fields stretching endlessly under the morning sky. Alejandro's hands tighten on the wheel as he turns onto the familiar dirt road. The truck bounces over ruts and potholes, kicking up dust that catches golden in the sunlight. His documentation sits heavy in the passenger seat. Bank statements showing the repaid debt, AA chips marking his sobriety, pay stubs from months of farm labor. Physical proof of his transformation, each piece earned through sweat and determination. But will it be enough? The question pounds in his head with each rotation of the truck's worn tires. The main gate stands open, weather-beaten wood marking the boundary between his past and whatever future awaits. Workers move through the fields like they always have, their voices carrying on the wind. A few look up as he passes, their expressions unreadable. He's learned their names over these past months of labor, shared meals in their homes, helped deliver their children. But today feels different. Today he's here to claim a place he's not sure he deserves. He parks near the main house, killing the engine. The silence feels heavy with possibility and dread. Through the windshield, he watches Carlos Morales emerge from the house, his familiar stooped shoulders and measured gait unchanged by time. But something in the older man's expression makes Alejandro's stomach clench. "Don Carlos," he says, climbing out of the truck. The words stick in his throat as he reaches for his papers. "I've come to." "Stop." Carlos raises a hand, and Alejandro falls silent. The morning sun catches the silver in the older man's hair, highlighting how much he's aged since they last spoke. "There's something you need to know first." The world shifts subtly, like ground giving way beneath his feet. Carlos's next words come from very far away, though the man hasn't moved. "Isabella passed 3 months ago. Cancer. It was quick, at least." Alejandro's knees buckle. He catches himself against the truck's hood, the metal warm under his palms. "No," he manages, though he knows Carlos would never lie about this. "I was supposed to." "She needed to see. She left this for you." Carlos pulls an envelope from his pocket, the paper creased and softened like it's been carried for a long time. "Said to give it to you when you were ready, when you'd proven yourself." The letter feels impossibly light in Alejandro's hands, Isabella's precise handwriting spelling out his name. He stares at it, unable to open it, unable to move. "I'll give you some time," Carlos says quietly, already turning away. "Come find me when you're ready to talk about the rest." Alejandro doesn't watch him go. The world has narrowed to the envelope in his trembling hands, to the weight of all the words he'll never get to say to her face. Somehow he makes it to the old oak tree where they used to picnic, sinking down onto sun-warmed grass that smells of summer. The letter opens easily, as if it's been waiting for this moment. "My dear Alejandro, if you're reading this, it means you've done what I hoped you would. You've found your way back to yourself, back to the man I fell in love with. I wish I could see it with my own eyes, but some dreams aren't meant for this world. I need you to know that I forgive you. I forgave you long ago, even before I knew about the cancer. Life is too short for bitterness, and love, real love, doesn't keep score. There's something else you need to know. That last Christmas, when everything fell apart, I was already carrying our children. Yes, children, triplets, if you can believe it. I kept it from you because I needed to know you would change for yourself, not for them. They're 5 now, beautiful and strong, and so much like you in ways that break my heart and heal it at the same time. I'm entrusting them to you along with the farm, not because you've earned it, though you have, but because they need their father. Because this land needs someone who understands both its value and its cost. You've learned those lessons the hard way, as we all must learn the things that matter most. Don't waste time with guilt or regret. I've lived a life full of love, purpose, and community. Now it's your turn to carry that forward, to show our children what it means to belong to something bigger than themselves. Te amo, mi amor. Even when I hated you, I loved you. Even now, I love you still. Isabella, the letter blurs in his hands. Alejandro presses his forehead against his knees, shoulders shaking with sobs that feel torn from somewhere deeper than his chest. Around him, the farm continues its eternal rhythm. Workers calling to each other in the fields, tractors rumbling in the distance, birds wheeling overhead. Life moving forward, even when it feels impossible that it should. He doesn't know how long he sits there, grieving for all he's lost, all he never had the chance to make right. The sun has shifted when he finally lifts his head, wiping roughly at his face with a calloused hand. In the distance, children's laughter rings out, high and clear as church bells. His children. The thought stops his breath. Somewhere on this farm, 3 lives are waiting that he helped create, but hasn't earned the right to know. 3 chances to do better, to be better, to love without conditions or expectations. The letter crackles as he carefully folds it, tucking it into his shirt pocket close to his heart. Then he pushes himself to his feet, legs unsteady but holding. Carlos will be waiting to talk about the rest, about what comes next, about how to build a future from the ashes of all his mistakes. Alejandro takes one step, then another, moving toward the sound of children's laughter. The morning sun warms his back like a blessing, or maybe forgiveness. Either way, he keeps walking. They're playing in the courtyard when he first sees them, 3 small figures chasing each other through patches of sunlight and shadow. His feet stop moving of their own accord, breath caught in his throat. 2 girls and a boy, Carlos tells him later, but in this moment they're just a blur of motion and joy, untouched by the weight of their history. Niños, Doña Clara's voice cuts through the morning air. Time for lessons. The children turn as one, and Alejandro's heart clenches. They have Isabella's eyes, dark and intelligent, taking in the world with quiet intensity. But the boy's stance, the tilt of his head, that's pure Bevon stubbornness, handed down through generations of men who never learned to bend until they broke. Who's that? One of the girls points at him, her small face serious. She's the leader, he realizes, the others shifting slightly behind her like flowers following the sun. Doña Clara glances at him, something complex passing through her weathered features. That's your papa, she says simply. He's come home to us. The words hit him like a physical blow. Home. As if he deserves such mercy. The children study him with that unnerving intensity, and he forces himself to stay still under their scrutiny. His hands itch to reach for them, to gather them close and never let go. Instead, he crouches down, making himself smaller, less threatening. Hello, he manages, voice rough. I'm very glad to meet you. The leader, Maria, he learns later, takes a careful step forward. Mama told us about you, she says, in her stories. Good stories, I hope. The words catch in his throat. Some good, some bad. Maria shrugs with all the wisdom of her 5 years. She said you were lost, but you'd find your way back. Behind her, the other girl, Sophia, peers out with curious eyes. Did you, she asks softly, find your way? I'm trying, Alejandro answers honestly. Will you help me? It's the right thing to say. Some of the wariness leaves their small faces. The boy, Antonio, named for Isabella's father, edges forward, clutching a worn baseball. Do you know how to play catch? He asks, hope warring with caution in his voice. I do. Alejandro smiles, remembering summer evenings with his own father. Would you like to teach me your way? The ice breaks slowly over the next hours, then days. Alejandro learns their rhythms, their fears, and favorites. Maria loves stories and asks endless questions about everything. Sophia hums constantly, making up songs about whatever catches her attention. Antonio collects interesting rocks and leaves that filling his pockets until they bulge. He learns other things too, harder things. How Sophia wakes crying from nightmares she can't describe. How Maria sets aside part of every meal as if preparing for scarcity. How Antonio watches adults with wary eyes, flinching at raised voices. They're sensitive children, Doña Clara tells him one evening as they watch the triplets chase fireflies in the gathering dusk. They feel everything deeply, like their mother did. I don't know how to do this, Alejandro admits, the words torn from some honest place inside him. How to be what they need. Doña Clara's laugh is gentle but firm. None of us do, mijito. We learn by doing, by failing, by trying again. The only unforgivable thing is not to try. So he tries. He learns to braid Maria's hair while quizzing her on multiplication tables. He sits with Sophia during thunderstorms, teaching her to count the seconds between lightning and thunder, to know the storm is moving away. He shows Antonio how to plant seedlings, explaining how roots grow stronger when they have to push through obstacles. The community watches his efforts with a mix of skepticism and cautious hope. But they help in their way. Workers slip him advice about parenting between discussions of crop rotation. Their wives invite the children for play dates, giving him time to learn the farm's operations. Their own children include the triplets in games and secrets, weaving them into the fabric of community that Isabella valued so much. Slowly, painfully, they become a family. Not the one he imagined all those years ago, drunk on ambition and scotch. Something harder won and more precious. A family built on choice rather than obligation, on healing rather than perfection. One night, tucking them into beds in the small house they now share, Maria asks for a story about their mother. Alejandro's throat tightens, but he begins, "Your mama was the bravest person I ever knew. She could see the good in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves." The children listen with shining eyes as he tells them about Isabella's dreams for the farm, her love for the community, her faith in second chances. When they finally drift off to sleep, Alejandro sits in the darkness between their beds, listening to their steady breathing. "I'm trying, mi amor," he whispers to the quiet room. "I'm trying to be worthy of them. Of you." Dawn paints the greenhouse glass gold as Alejandro walks the rows of experimental crops. Solar panels glint on the roof, his first major investment after taking over operations. The air inside is thick with the smell of damp earth and growing things, a scent that still surprises him sometimes, so different from the sterile cologne and leather smell of his old office. "Looking good, Jefe," Miguel calls from between the hydroponic towers. The old farmhand's skepticism has softened over months of working side by side. The tomatoes are taking to the new system. Alejandro runs a calloused hand over the vines, feeling their strength. Isabella was right about vertical farming. We've tripled yield in half the space. It's just one of many changes they've implemented. Wind turbines spin on the horizon, powering irrigation systems that use a fraction of the water traditional methods required. Cover crops enrich soil that decades of conventional farming had stripped bare. Each innovation builds on Isabella's original vision, expanding it in ways that honor her practical wisdom while embracing new possibilities. The sound of voices draws him outside. A yellow school bus crawls up the dirt road, kicking up dust that turns golden in the morning light. Fourth graders from the local elementary school here for their weekly agriculture lesson. The program was Sophia's idea, sparked by her own endless curiosity about how things grow. "Papa!" His daughter waves from where she's helping set up the demonstration plots. At 7, she's already more knowledgeable about soil chemistry than he was after 4 years of business school. "Can I show them the worm farm today?" "Sure, Mija." He watches her beam with pride. "Just remember what we talked about." I know. No letting them eat the compost this time." She rolls her eyes exactly like her mother used to. The gesture so familiar it steals his breath for a moment. The children pour from the bus in a riot of noise and color, their excitement palpable. Maria emerges from the farmhouse to help organize them into groups, every inch her mother's daughter as she directs traffic with quiet authority. Somewhere in the fields, Antonio is probably already deep in conversation with the irrigation engineers, absorbing everything about water flow rates and pressure differentials. They're good kids, growing straight and strong like well-tended crops. The thought brings a familiar ache that Isabella isn't here to see them, to know how her faith in both him and the land has borne fruit. A small hand tugs his sleeve. One of the fourth graders, eyes huge behind smudged glasses, holds up a handful of earthworms. "Mr. Bevon, are these the good kind or the bad kind?" There are no bad kinds, he answers, crouching down to the child's level. Each one has its purpose. Here, let me show you. The morning passes in a blur of questions and demonstrations. Alejandro moves between groups, explaining composting methods to one while helping another test soil samples. It's a dance he's learned over months of practice, this balance between teaching and learning, between leading and following the community's wisdom. At noon, they gather in the newly built community center, a simple structure of reclaimed wood and solar glass that serves as classroom, meeting space, and occasional dance hall. The walls are covered with children's artwork and agricultural charts, a timeline of the farm's history running along one side. Isabella's photograph holds pride of place, her smile watching over it all. Before we eat, Alejandro says, raising his voice over the hungry murmurs, I want to thank you all for being part of this project. What we're building here isn't just about farming. It's about community, about taking care of each other and the land that sustains us. He pauses, looking at the faces around him, his children, the students, the workers who've become family. Someone very wise once told me that the greatest crop we can grow is hope. That's what we're doing here, together. Growing hope, one seed at a time. The words feel inadequate, but the nods and quiet smiles tell him they understand. This transformation isn't just about sustainable agriculture or innovative techniques. It's about proving that change is possible, that broken things can be mended, that love can take root in the hardest soil and grow something beautiful. After lunch, he finds Maria studying the timeline, her finger tracing the path from past to present. Papa, she says without turning, do you think Mama would be proud of what we've done with her farm? Alejandro wraps an arm around her shoulders, breathing in the sunlight and soil smell of her hair. She was always proud, mija, of the farm, of you and your siblings. She knew what this place could become. And you? Maria looks up at him with those knowing eyes. Are you proud? The question catches him off guard. Pride was once his downfall, a poison that nearly destroyed everything. But this feeling, this quiet satisfaction in work well done, in lives touched, in a legacy preserved and expanded, this is something different. I'm grateful, he says finally, for the chance to be here, to help grow something that matters. That's better than pride. Maria nods, wise beyond her years in that way that sometimes breaks his heart. Together they stand looking at Isabella's photograph, at the living testament they're building to her vision. Outside, the wind turbines spin, the greenhouses gleam, and another generation learns to love the land that holds all their hopes. Music spills from the community center, mixing with laughter and the smell of wood smoke. Fairy lights twine through the nearby trees, competing with stars that seem close enough to touch. It's New Year's Eve, and the Morales farm hums with celebration. Alejandro stands at the edge of the gathering, nursing a glass of horchata. Around him, the community moves in familiar patterns. Workers and their families sharing food and stories, children darting between adults like schools of fish, elderly couples swaying to the music with the ease of decades of practice. Quite a change from last year, no? Carlos appears beside him, his own glass filled with something stronger. The older man's acceptance has been hard-won, built on shared work and shared grief. Like another lifetime, Alejandro agrees, watching his children weave through the crowd. Maria leads a game of tag, her voice rising clear above the music. Sophia dances with one of the farmhand's daughters, both girls spinning until their skirts bell out. Antonio sits with the older men, soaking up stories like the desert soil soaks up rain. The past year stretches behind them like a road mapped in moments. The first successful harvest under the new systems, the day the school board approved their education program, Sophia's dance recital, Maria's science fair victory, Antonio's first solo repair of the irrigation system. Small triumphs and daily miracles, each one a step further from the man he used to be. Fireworks bloom suddenly overhead, drawing gasps from the crowd. The triplets abandon their activities and run to him, practiced enough now to dodge the adults without collision. They crash into his legs with the confidence of children who know they're loved, who trust they'll be caught. Papa, Papa, Sophia tugs his sleeve. Can we go to the hill, please? We can see everything from there. He lets them pull him away from the party, toward the gentle rise where he and Isabella used to watch sunsets. The children run ahead, their laughter trailing behind them like kite strings, while he follows at a more measured pace. At the top, he gathers them close as more fireworks paint the sky. The farm spreads out below them, a patchwork of dreams made real. Greenhouses gleam like jewels in the darkness. Wind turbines catch starlight on their slow-turning blades. Beyond the fields, lights twinkle from the worker housing where new families have put down roots. "Tell us about Mama," Antonio says suddenly. It's become a ritual, these requests for stories about Isabella. Each telling helps stitch their family closer, binding past to present to future. "Your mama," Alejandro begins, voice rough with emotion, "loved nights like this. She said the new year was like a blank page, waiting for us to write our own story." "Is that why she forgave you?" Maria asks. "To write a new story?" The question catches him like a fist to the chest. These children, so young but so perceptive, see straight through to the heart of things. "I think," he says carefully, "she forgave me because that's who she was. Someone who could see the good in people, even when they couldn't see it themselves. Someone who understood that love is stronger than mistakes." Sophia leans against him, small and warm. "Do you think she can see us now? From heaven?" "I know she can, Mia." He kisses the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of sunshine and clean earth. "She sees how strong you're growing, how kind you are to each other and to the land. She sees everything we're building here." More fireworks explode overhead, casting their faces in shifting colors. In the distance, voices count down to midnight, English and Spanish blending into one hopeful chorus. Alejandro holds his children closer, feeling their hearts beat against his own. "Papa?" Antonio's voice is quiet. "Are you happy? Here with us?" The question deserves careful consideration. Happiness seems too simple a word for this feeling. This bone-deep certainty that he's exactly where he's meant to be, doing exactly what he's meant to do. "I'm at peace," he says finally. "Which is better than happy. Your mama taught me that." The countdown reaches 0. Cheers erupt from the party below as the new year arrives. The children wiggle free to dance under the sparkling sky, their shadows stretching long in the fireworks' light. Alejandro watches them, these miraculous beings who carry Isabella's grace and his determination, who've somehow inherited the best of them both. His hand finds the photograph in his pocket, the one from his first summer here, when everything was still possible, when he and Isabella were young and in love and unafraid of the future. "Gracias, mi amor," he whispers to the night sky, to the stars, to wherever Isabella's spirit dances, "for believing in second chances, for showing me the way home." The children's laughter pulls him back to the present. They're calling for him to join their dance, arms reaching out with complete faith that he'll take them. Around them, the farm breathes its ancient rhythms. The land that broke him has remade him, stronger at the mended places. Alejandro moves to join his children, stepping into their circle of joy. Above them, stars wheel in their eternal dance. Below, the community celebrates renewal. And here, in this moment between moments, a family grows stronger with each passing season, rooted in love and redemption and the endless possibility of beginning again. Thank you so much for watching and listening to our story. Your time and support mean the world to us. If this video resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content. Your engagement helps us grow and continue sharing meaningful stories. See you in the next video.